I'm Dave, and for as long as I can remember, Matt has been my best friend. We met in high school and have been through everything together, good times, bad times, everything in between. People used to joke that we were practically brothers. So, when I got promoted at work, Matt was the first person I wanted to celebrate with. It was a big deal for me. I'd been grinding for years to get to this position, and I thought Matt would be just as excited as I was. At first, it seemed like he was. He congratulated me, we went out for drinks, and everything seemed fine. But over the next few weeks, things started to feel off. Matt was quieter than usual, and when I talked about work or my promotion, he'd change the subject. I figured he was going through something and didn't think much of it at the time. But looking back now, I realized that's when it all started. It wasn't just the change in conversation, it was more than that. He started avoiding me. I'd text him to hang out, and he'd either leave me on read or come up with some excuse about being busy. It didn't make sense. We'd been inseparable for years, and now, out of nowhere, it was like he didn't want to be around me anymore. I tried not to let it bother me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And then, things took a turn for the worse. As the weeks went by, the distance between Matt and me only grew. Every time I reached out, he'd dodge my calls or give half-hearted excuses. I started wondering if I'd done something to upset him, but I couldn't figure out what. Maybe he was dealing with his own stuff and didn't want to talk about it. But why shut me out completely? It was weird. One night, I decided to confront him. I texted him, asking if everything was okay and if we could meet up to talk. He finally agreed, and we met at our usual spot, this little dive bar we used to hang out at all the time. When I got there, though, the vibe was tense. Matt looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact and fidgeting with his phone. I asked him straight up if I had done something to upset him. He sighed and said, "It's not you, man. I've just been going through some things." He gave me some vague explanation about stress at work and needing space, but it didn't feel right. It felt like he was holding something back. I tried to pry a little, but he shut down the conversation pretty quickly. We ended the night on an awkward note, and I left feeling more confused than ever. Something was definitely wrong, but I had no idea what it was. I thought maybe I was just overthinking things. But a few days later, I found out exactly why Matt had been acting so strange. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. A few days after that awkward meetup, I was scrolling through social media, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. But then, something caught my eye. It was a picture posted by another mutual friend of ours. It was from a party I hadn't even known about. And there, front and center, was Matt, hanging out with some of our old friends. The worst part? He never mentioned it to me. I felt a knot in my stomach. This wasn't just a casual hangout, it looked like a celebration. Everyone was smiling, drinks in hand, clearly having a great time. I scrolled through the comments, and that's when I saw it. Someone had written, "Congrats, Matt. Big move, bro." My heart sank. What big move? What was going on that I didn't know about? I decided to dig a little deeper. I messaged one of the guys who had been tagged in the photo, acting casual like, "Hey, what's this all about?" And that's when I found out. Matt had just landed a new job, my dream job. It wasn't just any position either. It was at the same company where I had been gunning for a promotion for years. The position he got was the one I had been talking about for months. The same one I'd told Matt all about during our late-night hangouts. He knew how much it meant to me. And now, he was the one who had gotten it, without ever saying a word to me. I felt sick. He hadn't mentioned any of it. He didn't tell me he was applying, didn't say anything when he got the offer. Nothing. All the weird behavior suddenly made sense. He wasn't just avoiding me, he was hiding something huge. At first, I couldn't believe it. I kept thinking there had to be some mistake. Matt wouldn't do this to me, right? We had been best friends for years. We shared everything. But as I pieced it together, the betrayal started to feel real. He had been sneaky. He applied for the job behind my back, didn't say a word when he got the offer, and even celebrated with mutual friends without including me. The one person who had been rooting for him all along. I felt a mix of anger and hurt. How could he do this? After everything we'd been through, this was how he repaid me. I'd always supported him, helped him out when he was going through tough times. And now he'd taken the one thing I had been working toward for years, my dream job. I thought about confronting him right then and there. I even typed out a furious text, but I couldn't bring myself to send it. I needed to cool down and figure out how I wanted to approach this. Plus, a small part of me was still hoping there was some explanation, something that would make this all make sense. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Over the next few days, I kept replaying every conversation we'd had over the past few months. Every time I talked about the job, Matt had seemed supportive, at least, that's what I thought. Now, I couldn't help but wonder if he'd been planning this all along. Maybe he'd been pretending to be my friend while secretly scheming to take the opportunity for himself. It was eating me up inside. I couldn't focus at work, I couldn't sleep, and I didn't know who to talk to. The person I would usually turn to in times like this was the very one who betrayed me. After a few sleepless nights, I decided I couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. I needed to confront Matt. If I didn't, it would just keep festering inside me, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. I wanted answers, and I needed to hear his side of the story, even if deep down, I already knew what the truth was. I called him and asked if we could meet up. He sounded normal, like everything was fine, which only made me more frustrated. How could he act like nothing had happened? We agreed to meet at our usual spot, a local cafe where we'd hung out countless times. As I sat there waiting for him, my mind raced with all the things I wanted to say. I was angry, hurt, and confused. But I was also scared of what this conversation might do to our friendship. When Matt finally walked in, he greeted me with a smile, like it was just another day. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. I cut straight to the point. Matt, did you apply for the job at Sterling Corp? The one I've been working toward for months. His smile faded. He paused for a second, and that's when I knew. He looked away, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Yeah, I did. But I didn't think. You didn't think what? I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. That I'd find out. That it wouldn't hurt. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, man, I know this seems messed up, but it wasn't personal. I needed the opportunity, too. His words hit me like a punch in the gut. Not personal. How could it not be personal when he went behind my back and took the one thing I had been working toward for so long? I had always been there for him, and this was how he repaid me. I stared at Matt, trying to process what he was saying. It wasn't personal. How could he say that with a straight face? The job at Sterling Corp was my dream, the one thing I had been working toward for over a year. He knew that better than anyone. We'd spent hours talking about it, strategizing about how to stand out during the application process. He knew how much it meant to me. So, you just went for it? I asked, my voice quieter now, more controlled, but the anger was still there, boiling just beneath the surface. Without even telling me. Matt shifted uncomfortably again. He avoided my eyes. I didn't know how to tell you, man. I thought you'd be pissed. Well, you were right about that, I shot back. But maybe if you'd been upfront, it wouldn't feel like you stabbed me in the back. There was a long pause, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I saw a flicker of guilt cross Matt's face. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, he said. I guess I just saw the opportunity and panicked. Things have been rough for me lately, and I thought this job could turn everything around. I wanted to feel sympathy for him. I wanted to remember all the times Matt had been there for me, the nights we'd stayed up talking about life, the good and the bad. But right now, all I could think about was the betrayal. He had gone behind my back and applied for my dream job. And not only that, he'd done it knowing exactly how much it would hurt me. "Did you get the job?" I finally asked, my stomach churning as I waited for his answer. Matt hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I did." Hearing him say it made my stomach drop. Matt had actually gotten the job, my dream job. It wasn't just an application anymore, it was real. He'd taken something that I'd worked so hard for and didn't even tell me. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I stared at him, trying to wrap my head around it. "You got the job?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "The job I've been talking about for months." Matt nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I didn't think it would happen this way, man. I didn't mean for it to go down like this." "Then why didn't you say something?" I demanded, the frustration boiling over. "You could have told me when you applied. You could have given me a heads up. But you kept it quiet until now, when it's too late to change anything." Matt finally looked up, guilt all over his face. I was scared. "I thought you'd be mad." "Well, congratulations," I snapped, unable to hold back the sarcasm. "Mission accomplished." "I'm mad. I couldn't believe this was happening. The one person I thought I could trust, the person who was supposed to have my back, had gone behind it instead. And not for something small, for my future, my career, something that meant everything to me. It was almost too much to process. Matt had been my best friend for years, but in that moment, I didn't know if I could look at him the same way again. The bond we had felt shattered, and I didn't know if we could ever fix it. After the initial shock wore off, I couldn't just let it slide. I needed answers. I needed to know why Matt, my best friend, would do something like this. We sat there in silence for a few moments before I finally broke it. "Why, Matt? Why would you apply for the job you knew I wanted more than anything? You knew how much this meant to me." He sighed, running his hands through his hair. "Look, I didn't think I'd get it. I didn't think I'd even get an interview. I was desperate, man. My job search wasn't going anywhere, and the opportunity came up. I figured I'd just throw my hat in the ring." "That's not an excuse," I fired back. "You could have at least talked to me. We've been friends for years, and you didn't think to even mention it." He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't know how to. I thought you'd hate me for even trying, so I just didn't say anything. And then when I got the interview, I didn't know how to tell you." I shook my head in disbelief. "So instead, you kept quiet and let me find out like this? You thought it'd be better for me to be blindsided?" Matt looked genuinely remorseful, but it didn't change the fact that he had betrayed me. "I know I messed up," he admitted. "I just didn't know what else to do." I stared at him, anger and hurt swirling inside me. "You've put me in an impossible position, man. I don't know if I can ever trust you again after this." Matt looked down, knowing the damage was done. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of what our friendship used to be, and what it had now become. After that conversation, things between Matt and me were never the same. We didn't officially end the friendship, but there was an unspoken rift between us that seemed impossible to close. We'd gone from hanging out almost every day to barely exchanging a few words when we crossed paths. I couldn't bring myself to fully confront what had happened. Every time I thought about it, the anger and disappointment came rushing back. Matt had always been the one person I could count on, and now it felt like I couldn't trust anyone. My phone buzzed with messages from him occasionally. Mostly apologies and attempts to meet up and talk things out. But I wasn't ready for that. I couldn't pretend everything was fine and sweep his betrayal under the rug. So, I ignored his messages, hoping he'd understand that I needed time. Meanwhile, work became unbearable. The same job I had been so excited about now felt tainted. Every time I walked into the office, I thought about the position Matt had stolen from me. I saw him around the building sometimes, always in meetings or chatting with higher-ups, and it only added salt to the wound. I withdrew from our mutual friends, too. I didn't want to talk about Matt or explain why things had changed between us. The silence, in a way, became my shield. But deep down, I knew I couldn't avoid this forever. Something had to give, and I wasn't sure if I was prepared for what came next. A few weeks passed, and the weight of everything started to get to me. Every time I saw Matt at work or heard his name mentioned by one of our old friends, it felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't escape it, and the tension between us was unbearable. One evening, I was sitting at home, mindlessly scrolling through social media when I saw a post from Matt. It was a picture of him with his new team, all smiles and celebrating his promotion, my promotion. The job I had worked for and dreamed about was now his, and he was out there living the life I had imagined for myself. My frustration reached its peak. That night, I decided I needed closure. No more ignoring him. No more pretending everything was fine. If I was ever going to move on, I had to get everything off my chest. I texted Matt, telling him to meet me at a cafe the next day. I didn't know what would happen, but I couldn't let this continue. When we sat down the next day, it was like we had both been waiting for this moment. The air between us was tense, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Matt didn't waste any time. "I'm really sorry," he said, looking sincere but almost too rehearsed. "I know I messed up. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I want to make things right." I let out a deep breath, staring at him, trying to keep my emotions in check. "You've been saying that for weeks, Matt, but it doesn't change anything. You took something that meant everything to me. You didn't think of the consequences. You didn't think about me." "I know," he replied, his voice cracking. "But I honestly didn't think it would come to this. I didn't know it would hurt you this much." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Could I forgive him? Could I ever trust him again? My mind raced as I realized that no matter what, this friendship would never be the same. As I sat there across from Matt, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and sadness. It was like he had no idea how much he had affected me, even though I had made it clear. But something about the way he was talking, the remorse in his voice, made me pause. I had been holding on to this anger for weeks, and here he was, apologizing, trying to make it right. But could I even believe him anymore? "I'm sorry for how things went down," Matt continued. "I never meant to hurt you, but I see now that I did. I wanted to prove myself. I got caught up in everything, and I made a terrible decision." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. I wanted to scream, to tell him how much he had ruined my life, but I had to stay composed. This wasn't about him anymore, this was about me. I had spent too long letting him control my feelings and my thoughts. "You should have thought about that before you took the position," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Before you sabotaged everything we had worked for. I trusted you, Matt. You were supposed to be my best friend, and you threw that away for your own gain." His face fell, and I could see the regret written all over him. "I know. I've been an idiot. I know I can't fix the past, but I want to make it up to you. Can we at least start over? Maybe we can rebuild this." I shook my head. "I don't know if we can, Matt. I'm still trying to figure out if I even want to." The silence between us was deafening. I could feel the weight of his betrayal sitting between us, and I realized that no matter how many apologies he gave, it wasn't going to take away the hurt. I didn't know if I could ever go back to the way things were. But before I could say anything else, Matt dropped a bombshell. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I have to tell you something." He paused, looking around as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. "There's something else that's been bothering me, something I didn't know if I should tell you, but I was manipulated into taking that position. There were people behind the scenes pushing me to do it. His words hit me like a freight train. My mind started racing. Who was behind this? And why was Matt just now telling me this? Matt's confession hit me harder than anything else he'd said. I could feel my stomach knotting up as I tried to process what he was saying. Manipulated? I had no idea what he meant, but something about the way he said it made me feel like there was more to the story than I had realized. I leaned forward, trying to understand. What do you mean? Who pushed you? Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Matt hesitated for a moment, looking guilty. I wasn't sure how you would react, but there were people at the company, higher-ups, who knew I was friends with you. They played on that. They offered me the promotion, told me it was my chance to really prove myself. They said you wouldn't mind, that it was just business. My mind was spinning. Higher-ups? I couldn't believe it. All this time, I thought it was Matt's decision, his ambition to climb the ladder, but now it sounded like he was just a pawn in a much bigger game. I wanted to be angry at him, but I couldn't help but feel a little sympathy. Was he really the mastermind behind all of this, or was he being used? But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say anything when you knew what was happening? I asked, struggling to keep my voice from cracking. Why didn't you come to me first? I was scared, he admitted. I didn't want to lose everything, our friendship, my job. I thought I could handle it, that it wouldn't affect you, but I was wrong. I thought if I just played along, things would settle down, but I ended up hurting you more than anyone. I took a deep breath, trying to sort through everything I had just learned. The betrayal, the manipulation, everything felt like a whirlwind I had never expected. But one thing was clear, I had been lied to, not just by Matt, but by people I had trusted at work. I don't know what to believe anymore, I muttered, more to myself than to him. Matt looked desperate. I understand. I just needed to tell you the truth. You deserve to know what really happened. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't sure what my next step should be. Should I trust him again? Could I? There were so many questions swirling in my head, but the one that stood out the most was, what now? The tension in the air was suffocating. Neither of us knew what the future would hold, but one thing was for sure, everything had changed. The silence between Matt and I stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. I didn't know how to process everything I had just heard. My mind was racing. What was I supposed to do with all this new information? I could feel myself starting to retreat into my own thoughts, and I knew I needed to make a decision. But I was torn. I stared at Matt, watching as he nervously avoided eye contact. He had confessed everything, but did that mean I should forgive him? I wanted to. I really did. He was my best friend, the person I'd trusted more than anyone else. But the betrayal had stung too much, and I wasn't sure I could just sweep it under the rug. I need some time to think, I finally said, my voice low. This is a lot to take in. Matt nodded quickly. I understand. Take all the time you need. Just know that I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I could see the genuine regret in his eyes, and part of me wanted to believe him. But another part of me was still in disbelief. I had spent so many years trusting him, confiding in him, and now it felt like everything had been a lie. How could I have been so blind? I'll reach out when I'm ready, I said, trying to steady my shaking hands. But right now, I need some space. Matt stood up, looking like he was on the verge of pleading with me. But he didn't. Instead, he just nodded solemnly and turned to leave. I could hear his footsteps fading away, and for a moment, I was left alone with my thoughts. What had I been doing all this time? I'd been so focused on my career and trying to please everyone else, that I'd let myself get taken advantage of. But now, I had the truth. I knew who had been behind everything. I just needed to figure out what to do with it. I couldn't stay stuck in the past forever. I had to make a decision. I had to decide what kind of person I wanted to be moving forward. Was forgiveness even possible? Or had Matt's actions destroyed our friendship for good? The clock ticked louder than ever in the quiet room, and I knew my decision was coming soon. I just wasn't sure if I was ready to face it yet. The days that followed Matt's confession felt like a blur. Every time I tried to focus on work or even my daily routine, my mind would wander back to the conversation we'd had. The weight of the betrayal hung heavy, like an anchor dragging me deeper into confusion. I tried to reach out to a few other friends, people who didn't know the full story. I needed perspective. But every time I started talking about it, it felt like I was reliving the pain all over again. They were all supportive, offering their advice, but nothing could change what had already happened. I went through every scenario in my head. Should I forgive Matt and move on? Maybe he was right, maybe he had been manipulated into making the wrong choices. But then I'd think about how it felt when I first found out what he'd done, and that raw anger would flare up again. I decided to call him. My heart raced as I dialed his number, uncertain if I even wanted to hear his voice. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Hey," Matt's voice was tentative, unsure. I could tell he'd been waiting for this call. "Matt," I started, trying to steady my nerves. "I've been thinking. A lot. And I need to be honest with you about how I feel." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm still angry," I admitted. "I'm hurt. But I've been trying to figure out what's next for me. And I think we both need to move forward, one way or another." I could feel my heart pounding as I spoke, unsure of what my own decision was. "I can't just pretend everything is fine. You broke my trust. And that's something I'm going to have to work through. But I also can't just throw away everything we had." "I understand," Matt replied, his voice softer now. "I've been waiting for you to say that. And I get it. I don't expect everything to go back to normal overnight. I'm just asking for a chance to show you I can be better." I took a deep breath, the decision weighing heavily on me. "I'll give you a chance, Matt. But I need time. I need to see that you can make things right." There was a brief silence before he spoke again, his voice full of relief. "Thank you. I won't let you down, I promise." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief mixed with uncertainty. This wasn't a happy ending, and maybe it never would be. But I knew that for now, it was the choice I could live with. The hard part wasn't over, but I had taken the first step. And that was more than I could say a few days ago. Now, all I had to do was wait and see if Matt could prove to me that he was really capable of making things right. Time passed. Days turned into weeks, and I had to admit, I was starting to see small changes in Matt. He was more present, more accountable. At first, I was skeptical. Every gesture, every apology felt like it could be another lie. But as time went on, I saw him making the effort. He'd show up when he said he would. He apologized more than once for the pain he'd caused, and it started to feel real. Still, I wasn't fully convinced. I couldn't let my guard down completely. The betrayal had been deep, and trust wasn't something I could just hand out. Every time we hung out, I kept waiting for that moment when things would go back to the way they were. But they didn't. It was like there was a shadow over our friendship, something that couldn't be erased no matter how hard we tried. But then came the turning point. It was a regular Friday night, and Matt invited me out for drinks. We talked about everything and nothing, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I laughed without that nagging thought in the back of my mind. And then, Matt looked at me, his expression serious. "I know I messed up. I know I can't undo what I did. But I just want you to know, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." That hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just an apology, it was a commitment. He was telling me, without saying the words directly, that he was willing to put in the work. He wasn't asking for me to forget, but for me to accept that he was trying to change. It was then that I realized something. Forgiving him didn't mean I was weak. It didn't mean I was letting him off the hook. It meant that I was ready to let go of the anger, to let go of the past, and move forward. It wasn't an easy decision. There were still days where I questioned if I was making the right choice. But I knew that life wasn't about holding on to grudges forever. It was about growth. For both of us. And so, I chose to forgive. Not because I had to, but because I believed that Matt deserved a second chance to prove himself. The truth was, he wasn't the only one who needed to change. I had to let go of the hurt, stop holding it over him like a weapon. We both had lessons to learn, and that was what made our friendship stronger. In the end, we weren't back to where we had been, but we had something better, a chance to rebuild with honesty, trust, and real effort. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I was willing to face it with an open heart.